Welcome to On Open Source. Conversations with thought leaders in the open source community.
So David, why don't you give us a little bit of background about who you are, what you do, and some of the stuff you've been working on recently.
Okay. So I worked for Sun from 1994 to 1997 in the heyday of Java. And Sun shut down our site in '97, and they gave us a choice of moving to California or leaving the company. And I'd lived in California before, so I left the company. And
great. Now I'm going to get hate mail from all of California.
And so I'd written graphic Java while I was at Sun, and so I kind of wanted to continue along the path of writing books and consulting and things like that. So I struck out on my own, where I've been ever since. So.
Okay. And more recently, you've done, you're working on a GWT book, correct?
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be out real soon now?
Actually, it's out.
Is it out now? Okay,
yeah.
Good. And before that, you did a JSF book, right?
Yeah.
And before that, was it graphic Java, or was there a couple other?
There were a couple in between. There was a JSTL book that sold about 10 copies, I think.
Okay.
And I had an advanced JSP book, and then the graphic Java series.
Okay. So you've been kind of, floating around in this UI space for a while now.
Yes.
And you and I both speak on the No Fluff Just Stuff tour, and one of the questions we frequently get, out of the audience on the speaker panels is, which web framework do I use?
Yeah.
I'm going to reprise that, but I guess I'm going to say, which are the ones that you're looking at yourself? I mean, I know you've spent time, as you said, with GWT and JSF. Before that, servlets and JSPs. Are you spending any time with Rails or Grails or any of those guys? Just give me sort of your take on the state of the web application union, if you will.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting situation right now. I think in many respects we have an embarrassment of riches in the UI framework space, and that makes it pretty tough to decide which framework to use. And when I speak, I often get asked, people will ask me, well, should I use GWT or should I use JSF? And the only answer I can give them is, I don't know, because there's so many variables that come into play. So you have to look at what kind of app you're working on, you have to look at your development team. There's so many variables that come into play that you can't just, there's no one-size-fits-all framework for anyone. So,
what are some of those variables? What would be an ideal condition for using GWT, for example?
Yeah, an ideal condition for using GWT would be if you wanted. So we have AJAX right nowadays, and fundamentally, of course, what that means is that we can have a user manipulate a control on a page and not redraw the whole page. So. Right. Something, of course, that we took for granted 10 years ago, and now seems like a big deal. But there's kind of really two sides to AJAX. There's a simple kind of AJAX where somebody fills in a zip code field, for example, and then when they tab out of the field, you're going to fill in city and state and go get that information from the server. So that's a pretty simple thing to do, to update those fields without repainting the whole page. And then there's kind of more high-powered AJAX, where what you want to do is, instead of just updating controls in real time, what you want to do is actually develop more like a desktop application. Right. So, if you want to do drag and drop, if you want to have windows with viewports in them, that kind of thing, more like the Swing model. So if that's the kind of application that you need to develop, then frameworks like Struts and WebWork and Tapestry and JSF are probably not going to stretch that far. And at that point, then I think you're looking more at GWT, which really GWT is essentially Swing that runs in a browser without web start. I mean, it's a different API, but fundamentally that's what it is.
But what you get out of it is still HTML and CSS and JavaScript, right? I mean, we're not actually doing an applet, right?
No, that's right, yeah. And so basically in GWT, what you do is you write in Java, and GWT compiles your code down to JavaScript, which is a pretty scary thing for lots of people, given JavaScript's reputation across browsers, right? But the cool thing about it is that when GWT compiles your code down to JavaScript, it actually compiles multiple dialects of JavaScript. So it'll compile a dialect for every browser that GWT supports. So you get a dialect for IE, one for Mozilla, and so forth. And then when you run the app, of course, it detects what browser you're on, and it pulls down the appropriate JavaScript. And fundamentally what that means is that instead of relegating smoothing out JavaScript differences among browsers to, say, two guys in their basement in Vienna working on Scriptaculous, right? And now what we've done is we've taken that responsibility for making the JavaScript work amongst multiple browsers, and we've put that in a compiler. And not only that, but we've put that in a compiler that's developed by Google. So, you know, Google's serious about this. They have a full team of developers working on GWT, something like 15 or 20 guys. A small team that just does nothing but work on that compiler. And so for me, I feel a lot more secure putting my trust in the Google compiler, because I have to put my trust somewhere, right? I can't do it. I can't, and I don't want to do it. I want somebody else to have that responsibility. And to me, you know, GWT compiler seems about the best place to encapsulate that complexity.
Okay. Now, contrast that with JSF a little bit. What's the different experience there?
Yeah, so JSF, of course, is the standard web application framework from Sun. And I've been involved with JSF from day one. I was on the JSF 1.0 expert, now I'm in the 2.0 expert group. And JSF is really, at least right now, more of a framework that's meant more for, say, Web 1.0 applications. So applications that are essentially predicated upon form submissions, where you essentially show a form and the submit button, and then you process that on the server and come back. And
some of the more traditional business web apps that people are kind of used to building? Exactly.
And you know, that's still, I would imagine, the majority of the web applications that are being built are still that style of web. We're just kind of seeing this sea shift now to more of desktop-like applications that run in the browser. And in many respects, I think GWT is kind of positioned more for future apps than it is for apps that are built today. Because like you said, I think most people are still developing those kind of Web 1.0 apps.
For more information, visit onpodcastweekly.com and subscribe to all our podcasts. Brought to you by the publishing imprints and information portal of Pearson Education.